Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this week's Senate and House Republican media availability. I'm Kimberly Wirtz, Communications Director for the Senate Republicans. Today, we're joined by Senate Republican Leader John Braun from the 20th Legislative District, Senator Chris Gildon from the 20th Legislative District, House Republican Leader J.T. Wilcox from the 2nd Legislative District, and House Republican Assistant Floor Leader Representative Peter Abarno, also from the 20th Legislative District. I'll turn this over to Senator Braun so he can kick us off with opening remarks. Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Kim, and thanks everyone for being here this morning for our press availability. So here we are, week 4, still focused on the same top issues, public safety. I think we're starting to get some progress on the Blake decision with bipartisan bills in both chambers. Seem to be moving forward and working towards a compromise we can get off the floor and hopefully get together on. Different paths, I guess I'd say candidly on pursuit right now, and I'll let GT talk about, but it looks like I'm optimistic in the House, less optimistic in the Senate, where the chair, Law and Justice, continues to say she will not hear a meaningful pursuit bill. Right now, they're basically kicking the can down the road with a bill that would turn over to the Criminal Justice Commission and probably delay any meaningful change, if we get change at all, for a year or more. That doesn't seem like the right answer. We're going to continue to push on it. We have seen, a lot of engagement on this, but no movement yet by the chair of Law and Justice or the leadership of the Senate Democratic Caucus. And then still, and some positive progress on providing for more law enforcement officers and training for law enforcement officers in our state. So that's some good things happening in public safety. On affordability, I think food, gas, housing, childcare. The one that's most optimistic in my mind right now is housing, which I think is the most important and most fundamental. There are some good bipartisan bills out there. We could certainly talk about those if you'd like. Do have concerns that for all the good bipartisan work that may happen on housing, that could be easily undone by one or two bills that discourage any additional investment in our state with rent control, or the climate change bill related to the Growth Management Act seems like it's coming up again, and it was very troubling and very discouraging for folks that want to invest in the state of Washington in housing. So we got some opportunity and some challenges there. And then finally, in education, I do feel like we're making some progress on getting attention to the learning loss. We have a couple bills moving in the Senate that may make a difference. We're not getting as much attention as I would like on broader education funding, but I will tell you, just the last thing I'll finish with is the budget. This is really early in the session, but it looks positive based on our read. It looks like we could fund all existing services and the collective bargaining agreements and still have as much as $4 billion to return to taxpayers and tax relief, or to invest in new programs, or just keep in the reserve. So I think budget wise, we're in good shape. We can afford to invest in things like education and other important services, and we'll just have to see how it shakes out. I'll stop there. Because there's still, so we have plenty of time for questions, and turned over to Representative Wilcox.
Thanks very much, John. And I will be brief because I woke up today and found that my voice is shot. Probably doesn't have a lot of minutes of talking in it. First of all, I'm glad that John referenced the hearing on the bipartisan pursuit bill. It's going to be heard in the House this afternoon. I have heard that the senator has said that it's too politicized to go on. I disagree. I think it's hard to find a bill that is more bipartisan than this in the House. The prime sponsor is a Democrat. The number 2 is a Republican. It passed both chambers with strong majorities last year of Republicans and Democrats. The only thing that makes it political is the fact that Senator Dingra has been delaying it and creating all of the controversy that could be easily solved simply by passing a bill that is overwhelmingly supported. I'm really happy that the House Democrats are willing to give it a hearing and hopefully advance it out of committee rather than just letting the Senate Democrats get in the way of it. A couple of other things that I think are critical in that arena. We're hearing from all across the economy that our problems concerning public safety are affecting everyday business people, from large companies to the smallest businesses. And it's not just pursuit. It's things like organized retail theft. And House Republicans have presented bills for the last 3 or 4 years that promise to be sensitive to all people, and at the same time address this growing problem that's contributing to the flight of retailers and grocers from some of the cities that need their services the most. I will hand off now to my colleague, Peter Abarno, who can enlarge on some things that my voice probably won't stretch to today.
Thank you. I don't have too much more to add from what the leaders have discussed regarding what's going on in the Senate and what's going on in the House. Most certainly, I think Senator Braun hit on the big points, which is affordability, those kitchen table issues regarding childcare, cost of fuel, home heating, those types of issues. Housing is going to be a large issue. It's good to see a lot of bipartisan movement in that direction to solve some of the housing issues. But most certainly, as Senator Braun mentioned, that can be unraveled by adding on to the cost of developing or even staying in your home, which seems to be something that a number of different bills would do. I think there's no quick fix to the housing crisis, and just an influx of money alone is not going to solve that. Looking at how we do permitting, opening up new space, dealing with those issues of infrastructure to actually lay the groundwork for housing is going to be very important. And an issue that is pervasive in every single community, which Representative Wilcox mentioned, which was the issues of the Blake decision pursuit, a new definition of retail theft, and making sure that we put police officers on the street so that you feel safe. And that is something that you hear across Washington State. Families feel unsafe, whether it's in the park or shopping on the street or going out at night. And we need to make sure that we have enough officers on the street, good training, and the tools to make our communities and our businesses safer. I think there's a good bipartisan movement on a lot of these different issues, but that can always be unraveled with a few different bills that just would set us back.
And then I guess I'll just round us off here with opening comments is I believe we are going to make some good progress in housing this year. This is my 5th legislative session, and I've never been more hopeful that we can actually move the needle in regard to increasing the supply of housing in Washington State and then putting downward pressure on house and rental prices throughout our state. And I'll be taking part in a bicameral bipartisan press conference today at 12:30. So I hope that you all can get there. But really, hopefully, we can make some really good progress in the areas of permitting, transit-oriented development, accessory dwelling units, and all of that. But like you've heard, if a couple of bills pass regarding rent control and adding climate to the GMA, that could really unravel a lot of the progress, the good joint bipartisan progress that we're trying to make this year. And then I'll just hit briefly on some of the public safety issues. I think there are 2 things that we must take action on this year. And one of them is fixing the police pursuit law. And the other one is correcting the Blake decision. With the police pursuit law, you've heard a lot about Senator Dingra. And, she said she's not going to allow her committee to consider the bill, and that those who do are simply being emotional. And, point blank, I could not disagree more. And I think anyone with eyes can easily see the negative impacts of that bill. But perhaps she just prefers to view the world through rose-colored driving glasses. I don't know. We can easily fix this, though, if she continues to be a roadblock. There are ways forward if we have enough courageous and sensible Democrats to join us. And I think that they are. They've just got to feel the ability to be able to do that. And then with regards to the Blake bill, I've signed on to Senator Solomon's, to the Blake bill. I've signed on to Senator Solomon's bill, and I think that is a really good vehicle to have discussions about fixing that particular issue. And I hope we can get that across the finish line.
Great, and with that, we'll go to questions, and I will start with Claire Withicombe from the Seattle Times. Go ahead, Claire.
Thank you. Good morning. This question is for Senator Gilden. I wanted to understand a little bit better some of the specific policies on housing that you support and why you're supportive.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess I could go through the list and give you the bill numbers or whatever, but we've got some bills talking about permitting. I know Senator Mullet, Senator Solomon, and myself have a couple of bills that speak to permitting. And the reason that's important is because right now it takes between 6 months and up to 1.5 years to process a permit in our state. And every day of that adds additional cost to housing. Some estimates say it's about $30,000 to the cost of every new home. If we can get some certainty and some predictability in order to reduce those timelines, then we're going to reduce the overall cost of housing, and we're going to give builders the confidence that they need to actually start a development process. One of the bills that I sponsored seeks to do that, and it's actually based off of consensus recommendations from a group consisting of builders as well as the associations of Washington state counties and cities. Because I know that we can't just put the impetus on the local municipalities to process permits faster. We've also got to give them some assistance mechanisms to help them process all of those permits in a timely manner, and that's what my bill seeks to do. And then we've got the transit-oriented development. I think it makes sense to increase density near those transit stops. But the bottom line is, the quickest way to reduce housing cost is to increase the supply to drive those costs down. And that's what we're shooting for.
Thank you.
Claire, did you have a follow-up?
No, thank you.
Okay, great. And then I will move on to Jerry Cornfield from the Everett Herald. Go ahead, Jerry.
Just on that issue of housing for any of the members, could you delineate more your opposition to the Growth Management Act changes that are being proposed as it relates to the climate? I mean, there was a bill that got to the finish line but didn't cross it last session. Many large counties are already incorporating some of those elements into their planning. So, and the urban counties. So I'm just wondering, what specifically do you have a problem with?
Well, the bill is before us now. It puts climate change as a consideration in the Growth Management Act. We already have significant delay and cost to building houses as a result of the Growth Management Act. Whether you like it or dislike it, it's undeniable that it's adding cost and time to the building houses. This adds another factor, which just by itself would be a challenge, but it's also a factor that's not clearly defined. So just about there's no real effective limit on what could be considered as a as a climate issue under the Growth Management Act. So you open yourself up to delay, to litigation, and cost that all slows down building and drives up cost of building. I mean, it goes in the opposite direction. And frankly, if you're trying to get after climate issues, this is just a very inefficient way to do that. It's not obvious it does anything meaningful to change, the emission of carbon. All it does is add cost and time to the building of houses. It's the wrong direction. I think it's pretty plain from our perspective. It's not as plain, obviously, from the proponents.
And I'll just add on a little bit. When you're citing a development or you're building houses, there's already a process for permitting. There's also, checks and balances with your local municipality when you're trying to build something. When whether you're connecting to infrastructure or not. The idea that you can add additional layers of process on without a delay or without additional costs is just unrealistic. Over the last decade, a lot of money has been infused in the housing arena, and we see we're just falling further and further behind. So adding additional layers onto this is not going to solve the problem. What's going to solve the problem, I think, is focusing on infrastructure, making it available, allowing local governments to be able to permit these in a more timely manner to avoid these types of things. Most of the issues regarding environmental impacts are already taken into consideration when you're building in a community.
Jerry, did you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, if I could, second topic, working families tax credit. Today, Representative Stokesbury had a hearing on his bill. Interestingly, nobody testified in favor of the bill. There were 3 who were support the idea of doubling, but they also, Democrats have bills to expand who can apply to younger folks, older folks, et cetera. I'm wondering, which do you like at this stage with the program ready to launch? Are you open? Would you prefer to see it expanded before the credit doubled, or double the credit and expand later?
Well, I'll jump in there, and I'm not deeply familiar with Representative Stokesbury's bill, but I think my first choice would be to look at broader tax relief, not connected to the working families tax. I mean, we have Republicans supported that bill. We really are the ones that drove it. You know, it was passed by Democrats over a decade ago. It didn't become funded until Republicans stood up, including Representative Stokesbury, and said, "Hey, this ought to be funded." I should say led by Representative Stokesbury. And so we're supportive of the idea. And, you know, if I had to choose between expanded or double the money, I personally would go with expanded. I think that there's a lot of folks stuck in the middle where they're not getting any broad tax relief. They're not getting any help from the state, but they're still having trouble making ends meet. You know, there are working families across Washington where costs have gone up, but and income has actually probably gone up, but not as much as costs, and they're having a more and more difficult time making ends meet. So my first response to that is we should set that aside and do broad-based tax relief, whether it's sales tax or gas tax. You pick your tax. We got to do something that helps everyone in Washington first. Barring that, it looks like the current majorities are going to stand in the way of any broad-based tax relief. I would prefer we expand it to cover more people, more families. You're muted, JT.
And that's too good an answer to improve upon.
Okay. Next, I will go to Joe O'Sullivan with Crosscut. Joe, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to check in on the missing middle bill. I know Barkus is a co-sponsor in the House, and I think Braun in the Senate, and it looks like the Senate bill is maybe moving forward. I just wanted to get your sense. I mean, does it feel like there's enough momentum to get that over the line this year?
I think it's too early to tell. If you'd asked me a few weeks ago, I would have guessed it was the opposite. It was moving quicker in the House than the Senate. You know, we've had a hearing. We certainly got some feedback. I think there's support, some level of support in both caucuses, but there's some reticence in both caucuses, frankly. So we'll see. I signed on to it simply because a recognition that we need to move forward somehow with housing, and this is a difficult bill, certainly for me and some Republicans, but it's a bill I'm willing to work on as long as the other side's willing to work on things like permitting and regulatory reform to help drive down the cost of building houses. So for me, this is part of a broader package to help us create a better environment. If we're going to do all of that, that makes sense. I think that will be the key to getting long-term support. Is there continued support for permitting and regulatory improvements?
So did I interpret that right to hear that there's potentially some sort of grand bargain on the table where if Republicans get some sort of permitting stuff, then sort of there's enough shared hard decisions by everybody, maybe a few of these things could move together?
I think what you heard is I hope for a grand bargain. I don't know that you could say it's on the table yet.
Yeah, I think we've said from the very beginning that, you know, the atmosphere is better this year for housing reform. It seems like all sides are serious. You know, I haven't heard anyone say that the bill that they dropped is cast in concrete. There are lots of appetite for improving these as we move along. There's been a few cases, I think, not in our chamber at this point, where people have questioned motives in ways that I don't think were very helpful. But if these things continue to move as they have, and we do the items that are agreed upon by, solid majorities in the middle first, then I think we can do some positive things for housing this year.
Okay. Joe, did you have a follow-up at all?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Next, I'll go to Drew Mikkelsen from King 5. Go ahead, Drew.
Morning. Thank you all for your time. On the pursuit issue, why not step back and look at the data? That's the bill that we all know is potentially progressing in the Senate. Senator Dinger doesn't think that we have enough data to say, let's go back to what we had. So why not take that time to study and look at those numbers?
Well, I'll jump in on that. I mean, because people are getting hurt. So if you said, hey, let's go back to reasonable suspicion for now, why we study it and then we revisit it, I think we'd be on board with that. We're not afraid to look at the data. But to say, hey, we've done this, we've made this, anti-police bill law for 2 years. We've had a significant increase in crime. We've had, we now know that the claim that has somehow helped reduce unintended injury from these pursuits is flawed and not valid. We've always said that we don't have, the data is anecdotal, or at least looks, but it looks like it's causing more crime. I think that you have to enter common sense at some point. If we are doing harm, and I think a common sense approach says we are doing harm with the bill as it is, we should back up. And if we want to study it, I don't think anybody on this call would oppose studying it. Just stop doing harm in the meantime.
Drew, did you have anything further?
Well, I'd love to know, just to get a sense of the room's reaction to the stack of bills that were introduced last week at the press conference dealing with traffic safety. Some bills that I think will impact drivers, may upset some drivers, like limiting rights on red, lowering the BAC, putting speed detection cameras in work zones. Do those bills have the support of your caucuses?
Well, I don't think that we're supporting the totality of the group, but we're willing to look at selected ones, especially the one having to do with the shocking number of deaths that have taken place in construction zones.
Yeah, I would second that. I mean, we're open to, we're certainly interested in reducing traffic related injuries or fatalities. No question about that. I think that what we haven't caucused on, and I think the approach will be, are these bills that are going after the offenders and the repeat offenders? Are these bills that are going after law abiding citizens that are already doing their part to keep streets safe? And there is a difference. And we're in favor of going after folks that are making our streets unsafe and not harassing people who are already abiding by the law.
Okay. Next, we'll go to Laurel Demkovich from the Spokesman. Laurel, did you have a question?
Kim, I wanted to ask about a bill that was heard yesterday in the House that would stop traffic stops for low-level violations like a broken taillight or expired tabs. I'm just curious, your both caucuses' thoughts on that. I know it's in the House right now, but if you have a sense maybe in the Senate too of kind of where you stand on that proposal.
I'd be surprised if we had widespread support for that. I think that when we allow experienced law enforcement to use their judgment, and at the same time, we make it very plain that we're not going to stand for discrimination, we will be more successful than just banning the enforcement of laws.
And we really haven't considered this yet in the Senate. I think that our approach will be similar to what Representative Wilcox said. Look, there should be zero tolerance for any kind of discrimination related to law enforcement stops. We can tolerate none. We should create a system, and I think we largely have a system that trains officers to behave appropriately and holds them accountable when they do not behave appropriately. We should reinforce that if we need to, but it's hard to see how tolerating certain violations of law helps us get there in an orderly and reasonable fashion.
Laurel, did you have a follow-up?
Yes, on Blake, Senator Braun, I know you mentioned that you felt like there has been some progress on that. I'm curious if you can talk a bit more about, in each chamber, what proposal or bills you're kind of getting behind. I know that there's a lot that have bipartisan support, but is there a sense yet of kind of what you're hoping the final outcome is?
Well, Senator Gilden talked a little bit about this. We have, I think, 3 bills in the Senate. I think all of them got heard. The bill that from Senator Robinson that would go back to a gross misdemeanor, but doesn't really enforce give prosecutors and law enforcement broad latitude. The bill that Senator Solomon has introduced that is also a gross misdemeanor, focuses on treatment. And I would just say all of these bills focus on treatment, and the goal of all of them is to get folks into treatment and keep them in treatment. There's just different views on how we do that. Solomon's, I think, does a better job of sort of upping the ante, recognizes and provides a path for getting people into treatment and holding them in treatment, but also recognizes if they don't stay in treatment and finish, that there are mandatory sentences. We like that better, that there's real consequences and gets therefore real leverage to get people in and keep people in treatment. And then we have Senator Patton's bill that would go back to essentially the law prior to the Blake decision, where you knowingly possess a substance that's illegal. And his goal, I think, is the same. He thinks that by keeping it a felony, it allows folks to enter drug court as it's set up in most of our communities. Drug court has been successful in getting people in and keeping them in treatment, and he believes that has been effective, and we should support it. I don't disagree with him on that, although I think that is both maybe politically difficult, but also recognize that there are some other consequences of making long-term consequences for folks of making a felony versus a gross misdemeanor. So I think if we can create this leverage and get people in treatment without doing the felony, I think that's an acceptable compromise. That's why some of us are signed on to Senator Solomon's bill. I think it needs a little bit more work to get it refined and ready for a vote, but Senator Solomon's been a good partner on this, and he's open to negotiating and fine tuning it based on feedback from law enforcement and prosecutors. So I remain hopeful that whether that's the bill or not, that's the compromise that ultimately gets to the floor of the Senate and gets the votes it needs to pass over. I can't speak with authority on what's happening in the House, but I think my impression is it's kind of a similar process.
And I'd say, if I could tag on, I mean, this should not be a partisan political football, right? This isn't a matter of people are hurting out there and they're addicted to drugs and they need to get help. We need mechanisms to get them into treatment. And, quite possibly, I'm not sure what form the ultimate bill is going to come out, but this is something the legislature must take action on this year, because there's just too many people that are in need of help right now, and we've got to be there for them.
Okay, and lastly, we'll go to Jeannie Lindsay from Northwest News Network. Jeannie, did you have a question?
Yes, hello. I am the new state government reporter for Northwest News Network. Nice to meet you all. I just had a question on the police pursuit legislation. If the House moves forward with that, but things continue to stall in the Senate, I'm just wondering what sort of options there might be, or what compromise might be attainable where that could land potentially.
Well, I'd say if the House is able to put together a bipartisan bill, much like last year's bill, and pass it over, and again, in a bipartisan manner, I think there's enormous pressure on the Senate majority, the Senate Democratic majority, and their leadership to get that thing through. Because I know for certain there are lots of folks in their caucus that want to see this resolved. Right now, as we've discussed, it's being kind of held hostage by the chair, but I'll just remind everybody that chair works at the pleasure of the caucus and caucus leadership. So it's not just her standing in the way. Right now, it's that whole caucus. And I don't think that whole caucus is of one mind that we ought to stop this bill. I think if it comes from the Senate, or I'm sorry, if it comes from the House in a bipartisan manner, that pressure just increases. And I'm hopeful that allows us to find a path forward.
Let me also say this, if Senate Democrats, individuals speak up and indicate their support, I think it makes it more likely that it comes out of the House too. So they have some big roles to play in both chambers in getting this critical bill through.
Jeannie, did you have another question?
I don't. Thank you so much.
All right. And with that, I will turn it back over to leaders for any kind of closing comments before we're done for this morning.
Well, I'll just jump in there and just repeat some of what you've heard me say all over and over. You know, there's a ton of things going on here in Olympia. We're trying, you know, in the minority, you have just so much ability to affect things. We want to make sure it's on the most important issues. That's why we're focused on public safety. You've heard us talk a lot about that today. We're focused on affordability, in particular housing. You've heard us talk a lot about that today. There's a lot to do across the board there. We didn't talk a lot about education, but I think we're still very much focused, especially on learning loss. We're gonna be working on other things. That's not all we're working on, but we're trying to keep first things first, and we'll keep pushing on these issues to have a real impact during the session. Thanks for coming, JT.
Yeah, and I will thank you for being here. I enjoy your questions, and will say that I still feel like this session is moving along in a more congenial and effective way than we've seen in the past. We've got about 80 days to screw that up, but the first 21 or 22 have been positive. And I think that's what you and the people of Washington want to see, is folks working together to get stuff done for the state. And we're going to continue to put all of our efforts into that for the rest of the session.
Terrific. Well, thank you all for joining us today.